development, including investing in its water system, drainage system, promoting integrated urban development, as well as awareness raising and financing the early warning system and rapid response system of the cities, etc. But yes, as a new and relatively young and small multilateral development bank, we want to do better and do more. We want to make sure that our money is spent on the right interventions. We've had a series of dialogues in this pavilion this week, including the one just preceding us on climate adaptation financing. We've talked about business opportunities in the adaptation financing field. We've talked about PPP, etc. And we had 2 sessions more specifically on water management in Indonesia, water resilience challenges in Central Asia. I think in terms of financing, we have some good ideas. In terms of specific challenges in a few of the client countries, we have some idea. But now we really want to drill down into the very topic of these sessions, right? The tools and methodologies of assessing urban risks and resilience, because we want to make sure that we not only know the specific demand and gaps in our client countries, but make sure that we pick the right interventions to finance. Okay, with that, let me hand over to Dr. Sinaka for the keynote speak. While I welcome him onto the state podium, let me quickly say a few words about his background. Dr. Sinaka Basnayaki is the director for Climate Resilience Department of our partner ADPC, and he holds a PhD in meteorology from and has more than 30 years experience in this field already. And he's worked on project management and strategic guidance for implementing climate risk management, climate adaptation, urban resilience projects and programs in Asia and the Pacific. He has a much longer bio that I'm not going to finish, but just to note that Dr. Sinaka has lived and worked in quite a few different Asian countries, and he's joining us, I think, this time from Bangkok.
The partnership that we have been discussing so far. So this specific event we planned according to and jointly to sort of discuss and then present to you about the tools and methodologies that we can use to assess the urban risks. I choose the topic quite similar to the theme of the event, the tools and methodologies voices in urban vulnerability and risks. So if I may move, briefly, a brief intro to ADPC, Asian Disaster Preparedness Center. Asian Disaster Preparedness Center is an autonomous international organization headquartered in Thailand, working in Asia and the Pacific. We have more than 30 years of experience. We are functioning with very specific vision, which is safer communities and sustainable development through disaster risk reduction. As you can see on the right-hand side, we have a couple of themes, 6 themes. So urban, climate, risk governance, preparedness, response, recovery. Those are sort of themes, as well as we do have cross-cutting themes, as you can see here. The cross-cutting themes poverty and alleviation, transboundary cooperation, so on and so forth. On the left-hand side, you can see our partnerships. So which is important. So today also, we are trying to build partnerships through these engagements. For example, governments, we are very closely working with national governments, subnational governments, as well as the communities. So that's the strength on us actually to work and closely work with the non-national governments and across all layers, as well as regional organizations, development partners like AIB and other banks, and regional organizations, so on and so forth. So in addition to the pressure that we are getting population growth, as you all know that more than 4.5 billion now in cities, 55 or 56%. So it's going to be projected 68 or so by 2050. So much of population growth is happening, so a lot of pressures are there. In addition to that, what we need to understand, the risks are coming from climate and disaster. As you can see here, as per the IPCC sixth assessment report, Working Group 3, it is highlighted number of cities which they have been facing last 30 years ending 2015. You can see that now hydro as well as meteor events are quite high. So we need to have sort of understanding on that to cope up with these things to the future. So to build resilience in any context, but here I'm trying to highlight the urban context. So these are some of the sort of like, components or the elements that we need to understand. The first and foremost thing is to do risk assessment. You need to understand the risks, whether it is coming from climate or even geological hazards. Understanding risk is the important for you to build all other solutions, adaptation, and so forth. So we at ADPC, we have been like, strongly sort of like, working on this in this area particularly, and educating other countries also to do sort of risk assessment. When it comes to risk assessment, you have like, several sort of like, layers, meaning that you can do at national, subnational, but at community level as well. Here we are talking about a city scale. So it's so important for us to go to that scale in order to understand climate as well as the disaster risks. So after understanding risks, of course, then you can come up with solutions, which could be what we have been talking about, climate change, adaptations, as well as from our end, actually, as I was mentioning, DRR organizations as well as climate resilience organizations. So we do look like, both. So DRR measures or even adaptation measures, then you can start thinking of after understanding risks. So in each and every country, they have sort of limitations. We call soft limits as well as hard limits for adaptation. That we need to be mindful. The sort of like, countries like, let's say I'm coming from Sri Lanka or even Bangladesh, we do have some limits. We cannot really compare with the developed countries. For example, when it comes to water related things, so Netherlands, like, they can have a sort of like, maybe the adaptation limits are quite high. They can do sort of like, hard solutions. They can come up with hard measures as well. So after understanding the level, then we can sort of understand the risk, that we can come up with sort of like solutions. And there are limitations beyond which you need to have other solutions, which we call understanding like, addressing residual risks. So maybe insurance or let's say like, risk transfer is also important aspect actually, which we did not think much in the past. So maybe insurance. For that, actually, we need to have some tools there also to understand, to estimate losses and damages. I'm not talking about the damage and losses after event, but when it comes to climate change, now we have been discussing like, also international mechanisms there over the years. And then we need to have some tools and methodologies also to assess losses and damages for the incoming or impending the disasters. Of course, towards the end, you need to come up with solutions like, the tools, and then of course capacity building, which probably our colleagues will be highlighting in a minute. So this specific context at ADPC, what we have been like doing, so we do have guiding principles. We use science to understand risks. So you need science-based information. Risk assessment comes under that actually. So once we have once we understand the risks, of course, you need to develop systems in order to manage risks. So then, of course, application is like you can apply to reduce risks. So these are the three pillars that we have been using across ADPC, but it is also applicable for urban context. And we are very much aligned with our work with all global agendas. You can see a new urban agenda for this specific one, SFDRR, SDGs, as well as Paris Agreement for Climate Change. On the right-hand side, we are highlighting some sort of like domains or the activities that we have been doing in the past. Because as I was mentioning, we are kind of DRR and CR organization. When it comes to urban resilience, we may not be doing everything because there are several other things we can do. But, under the sort of like our purview umbrella, we are functioning. So one of the things I was keep mentioning, risk assessment is important. Then, of course, the other ones like, solutions, for example, like, strengthening early warning system. It is not something like national level, subnational level, community level, but it is across all levels. And then, of course, risk-informed planning. The first, I think, basis for that actually is the risk assessment. You need to revisit some of the, the master plans, the plans that they have developed in the past to be more risk-sensitive or risk-informed. And the committee empowerment is also important, as well as sectoral preparedness. And one of the solutions like, NBS, for example, our colleague, Professor Tony Wong, will be speaking on that particular line. And this is sort of the framework that we have been using. It is very common to others as well. In order to understand risks, you need to have several pieces. For example, hazard and the vulnerability of that community or the physical systems, as well as the exposure. people or even buildings, structure, what do you call the critical infrastructure, so on and so forth. I highlighted the climate risk. The conventional method that we have been using in the past, actually, we sort of used historical events to simulate hazard, which is the past. But it may not be a good option for us because climate is changing, extremes are changing, things are changing. So better to extract the future events from future scenarios. We do have global models. Now, along with CMIP6, there are more than 100 models. We can use them to extract rainfall or temperature, whatever the meteorological parameters, and then you can, input into your regular sort of the hazard models, flood hazards, or hydrological model or hydrodynamic model. So it's a kind of framework that we have been using. What I'm trying to highlight, ADPC started thinking of climate inclusive risk assessment because we are now influencing hazard information, hazard layer in order to get there. In order to do, you need to have sort of downscale future scenarios. That is challenging. As some of you very well aware of, there are global models. There are many models from CMIP6 data set, but those are cost resolutions. So you need to have sort of very much robust method in order to downscale. What we have been doing actually in the region, this is one of the projects that we implemented in Indonesia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, just to show you that work that we have done, we have downscaled this in our future scenarios into these countries 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. After that, actually, that information we use for hazard modeling and then to get the hazard information. So the case study one, so this is the case study that we developed, we implemented this one, the project implemented in Vietnam. This is funded by NORAD. And we were trying to develop or improve the resilience in two cities. One is actually Mito to the south, that is Lower Mekong. The other is Nam Dinh to the north, that is Red River. So these are deltaic sort of cities. They have been facing so much of issues. Here we are trying to address few hazards according to our basic understanding and then a discussion with them. So for example, flood is important. Flood we have been addressing, and then the heat waves, cold waves, and then the drought as well. So this is the situation, the sort of the, what you call the population, some information you can see. The left side, you can see the Mito city, the other one, the Nam Dinh city. Then as I was emphasizing, we did very detailed hazard assessment, which is a climate inclusive. We use the climate models to extract this information. Actually, the cost resolution models, as you all know probably, NASA Earth Exchange next. So there are 36, 37 models from the CMIP6 data sets. We use those data, which is which are 25 by 25 kilometer horizontal resolution. But when it comes to recity scale, we wanted to further downscale. So we use some statistical approach method in order to downscale. Once it is done, so we ran this, the hydrological models. You can see that, the hazard assessment that we did for this, two cities. And then different hazards, floods, as I was mentioning, cold waves, heat waves, strong winds, but here it is not showing the drought. We also did drought. And the important point that I'm trying to highlight here, once we did this exercise, we discussed with the city authorities, and then we realized that they have developed their master plan, special development plan from 2014 to 2030, sort of 15-year plan. You can see those in the map. Zonings are there, 3 and 2, if you can read it. Those are industrial zones. The right-hand side, that is the hazard map that we developed. But here actually I'm showing only 30 years, 2030, but we also developed 2050, 2080, so on and so forth. You can see the blue is light blue, of course, depending on the contrast, is a flood level. And you can see even 2 and 3, so industrial zones, by the time maybe 2030 or even further, beyond, so these area will be flooded. So what we discussed with the city, so using this one, we made some recommendations to the city to revisit or revise the master plan, to make some sort of adjustments if necessary, or maybe adjustments in the sense zoning. This is one good example that we did very recently. So the project is completing very soon in this month, basically. And of course, this is risk-informed planning. Another good example I want to bring here from Bangladesh. You can see that one of the cities, Rashai, so we helped them to revisit the master plan by doing this, risk assessment, very thorough risk assessment for floods and drought, fire, as well as earthquake. We did risk assessment, and then we revisited the master plan that they have did it, and then it was submitted. This project already completed. What we found actually, the government ministry already approved this master plan to implement for the next 20 years. So this is a success story from our end. So we did this exercise with that particular city in Bangladesh. Actually, we trying to discuss with the AIB in the past also. This is one good example. We were trying to develop some sort of bankable project out of this risk assessment, so that maybe other banks, development banks, can come and support them. These are some of the maps that we developed. Floods, I will quickly run through, hazard, and fire, and the earthquake. So next example is also from Bangladesh. Probably you are aware of this Cox's Bazar camps, the Rohingya camps actually, if you can remember, so 2018. And there was a sort of the Bangladesh government, they stopped very kind of the camp for them to stay, but it was very unplanned. So many million people came in, so they were not able to do it. And we were requested by UNHCR to do risk assessment for landslide. So this informal, kind of not informal settlements, but it's in very regular way. So we did this exercise, and then we made some recommendations. The same year, 2018, there was a tropical cyclone, and there were some landslides. Fortunately, they were able to evacuate and then make some adjustments to the areas. So I think people were not much affected. So there were a couple of events afterwards. This is another example for flood, the same city, so same area. Then here what I'm trying to emphasize, so once we develop this risk information, risk map, there should be a proper way of communicating with respective stakeholders or even government authority. Otherwise, we develop systems, maps, and if you just in your laptop or in the particular city official laptop, it doesn't really useful. So what we did actually, we introduced this tool, Mobilize, which was developed by University of Salford, the UK, and then they can actually access this information through this software so that visualize. Even if we complete the project, they can still use this information. I'll quickly go through this one. Actually, this is one of the tools or the measures that I mentioned earlier. So for example, in order to improve resilience, we also need to work on strengthening early warning systems. This is one of the tools that we have been using, impact wave forecasting and warning, because the warnings are issued by national or subnational. It doesn't really come to the community in time. So that has been the issue. And then those information are very much parametric based, meaning that they will say that this much of rainfall will be there. They will not tell you, still till today, they will not tell you this road is going to be this much of flooding. So that impact-based forecasting, which we have been highlighting or promoting in other countries, this is part of the project. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sinaka. I know I haven't given you sufficient time. There's so much depth to what you have just introduced. But let me share my quick 3 takeaways. I think you touch upon resilience building really starting with the assessment. And while we have done a lot at national level, a lot more need to be done to the city scale. And to that end, we need to adjust our existing models that are most fitting for national level assessment to the city scale. The battle, I would say, of resilience adaptation will be won or lost in cities. The second, you really talked about how the climate inclusive hazard assessment, because we, as my colleagues too, believe that there's really the adaptation, resilience, and disaster risk management nucleus. These 3 things cannot be separated from each other. And lastly, there are many takeaways I can share, but lastly, I also like your last point about risk communication. Once we have the solid analysis and assessment findings, how do we use the findings to communicate with not just our communities, but decision makers who can then shape governance and planning? So thank you. With that, let me welcome to the podium our first discussant, Professor Nicola Tolin. Professor Nicola Tolin is a professor at University of Southern Denmark. And I think one thing really special about all three discussants today is that they are not only very accomplished academics, but they are deeply involved in the practitioners' world in terms of contributing to their own national government climate agendas and programs and actions, but also work closely with the active international organizations. Professor Tolin himself is the UNESCO Chair on Urban Resilience at his University of Southern Denmark, and he has more than 30 years of experience working with various UN agencies, including UN Habitat, UNESCAP, UNESCO, UNFCCC, WHO, UNOPS, the Green Climate Fund, of course, and I hope very soon you'll be working with the AIB directly. So let me welcome you to the stage.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our host, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center for the very kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and have the possibility to speak after Dr. Seneca that very eloquently highlighted the importance of information at local level regarding this. I would like to contribute on this starting from this report we published last year with UN Habitat, analyzing the urban content of the national climate contribution. We are currently, this year we already updated our global analysis with the new 29 NDCs. And we are preparing a second report also together this year with UNDP that will be published in the next few months, where we are looking at how much urban content each NDC is having. And from the positive side, a consistent number of NDCs are having an urban focus. Almost a little bit more than 1/4 are having actually a strong urban content, meaning they are prioritizing urban sector. On the less positive side, there is still a huge space and a huge distance to go in order really to strengthen this type of content, to relate it to urban climate action, and also to not only to identify important actions at local level, but also to understand better the baseline, both for the carbon budget at local level, but also to understand better risk and to base the action listed in the NDCs for cities on a thorough type of risk analysis that at the moment, for example, is lacking particularly the part on exposure and vulnerability. In this line, and for example, from our analysis last year and this year, we've been also highlighting that there is a growing but still quite low number of NDCs that are clearly in identifying risk, and most of the risk identified are water-related, either for excess or lack of water, spanning from floods to sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, waterborne diseases, etc. And there are also some actions that are counteracting this. In the report this year, forthcoming report, we will prepare actually 194 country briefs that will give a clear understanding on which are the key challenges and responses for mitigation and for adaptation by sector, benchmarking what there is at national level and what there is for urban, in order to better understand how to strengthen action, how local level can contribute to raise ambition of national policies, and how national policies can contribute in supporting local action for this ambition. This could be used, in fact, as a tool both for project preparation and also as a tool for project appraisal, because this will fill in basic criteria of bankability, meaning the alignment with national climate policies. We are aiming to expand this analysis also to NAPs healthy lights. And also in the forthcoming report, we already look at other national climate policies in order to have a full overview at national level for what there is urban local climate action. Another important part, and here we are touching a sensible thing, and my esteemed colleague after will touch also on directly on finance. It's also some other data extracted from our global analysis of NDCs. There is very, very little regarding explicit request of financial support for local climate action. There is a huge gap in between what is listed in the NDCs and the need of tens of trillions per year on infrastructure and particularly climate infrastructure. So we are not really able to see that. Most of these actions are conditional, but they're not identifying clearly how much that will cost. And this is also related to definition of cost of inaction, definition of co-benefit, for example, for nature-based solutions, as after we will add upon. Ultimately, I would like to conclude stating another fundamental important point in terms of tools and approaches. That's the creation of capacity for policymakers, for practitioners, for researchers working together. Over 5 years ago, in partnership with over 25 international organizations, we established the International Urban Resilience Academy. And we have been running training for policymakers, practitioners, and researchers since, in order to understand better risk, understand better future scenarios, define how to develop a strategic and action plan, and in the further development of this training, we would like also to use this as a facility for the creation of bankable projects. And also develop ad hoc training regarding use and leverage of finance, both from public and private sector. Since 2022, actually, almost a first anniversary, we also start to realize together in partnership with the DPC, regional training for Asia and Pacific, specifically for the region. And now we are discussing also the further development of this training at national level, for example, in Indonesia, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Tolin. You were right on time. And thank you for articulating it so clearly in this very loud environment. There are many, many things competing for our attention, but we need to keep voicing out for the urban resilience agenda. Okay, next, let me welcome our next speaker, Dr. Tusita Sugatapala. He is from Sri Lanka and has his PhD in engineering from University of Cambridge. And not only is he a very well-established academic, but he's been very, very active in the national government of Sri Lanka's various initiatives. He's been involved You've been involved in helping the country to develop the national policy and strategy on sustainable development on the broadest sense, and then the National Environmental Action Plan, the NDC, the NAP, as well as most impressively to me is about the working with their central bank to develop the green finance taxonomy, but also working with the investors group to further promote it. Okay, I'm going to skip the more detailed description of your achievements, but welcome you to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank again AIIB and also the partner organization for the asking us to share our experience and learn from you all. Thank you very much. So I will be talking on the local context, how the urban resilience has been prioritize and also the tools we have used to address the issues. So just to highlight that the importance of urban resilience in Sri Lanka. So we have been identified as one of the worst impacted country on because of these climate change issues. And so therefore, especially looking at we are an island and we look at the coastal area, there are many cities around the coastal area. So therefore, all these climate hazards are really impacting our urban sector. So therefore, we have prioritized the resilience as a need for urban systems, the cities, and human settlements. So therefore, it's a very important topic for us. So when we look at the basic approach, now we are more and more looking into the broader context of sustainability when we try to prioritize, because we have limited resources, so you can't do everything. So we have to select projects based on some prioritization. Earlier, we are looking at only one area, but now the government is looking into more broader context, looking at like a criteria and indicators related to the sustainability framework, and starting from comprehensive list and boil down to the prioritized selected area for the implementation. I just want to highlight that. So that's the approach we, like a methodology we use in a broader context. But when you go into the detail on this topic of urban resilience, I can just highlight that some of our key policy interventions, we have identified this as a key sector. For example, National Adaptation Plan we published in 2016, and we are also now revising it. And in fact, as Dr. Seneka also indicated, now we are, expanding this National Adaptation Plan for provincial, the local level is happening now. So there are the importance of localizing, going into city level is already identified. So we identify human settlement and infrastructure as one of the 9 NAP sectors. Then look at the nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Again, we submitted the updated one in 2021. And there we have urban planning and human settlement as one of the, we have both mitigation and adaptation. So 9 adaptation sectors. One of the sectors is again, the human settlement and cities. And then recently, a year or two back, the government has published what we call National Environment Action Plan for the next coming 10 years, 2030. There are also one of the 9, there are 9 thematic areas. One of the thematic areas is, again, the human settlement, the urban cities, and so on. I want to highlight that basically, so that's the way we start, basically, prioritizing this sector among our development plans. But something we have to identify here also that these are not in, like urban sector is not in isolation, like it's connected to other sectors like water, energy, transport. So it's become very complex. So we have to address the urban resilience by looking into the other sectors too. So therefore we can't just isolate as a separate sector, but these are integrated. So we look at the earlier one is basically like a strategic level. But when you go into operational level, the government of Sri Lanka has initiated some of the activities very recently. One thing I want to highlight this, central bank, the green finance taxonomy, which has been developed as a matrix and a threshold for supporting the financial agencies to prioritize the projects. So we have now tools, a mandatory one to be followed by all the financial agencies, so that when we tag a project as green, even the resilience projects, we have to qualify through this taxonomy. It's a very comprehensive kind of a methodological approach is there. So that's one thing. Then in addition, we also, with the support of UNDP, we have published this what we call the SDG investor map. I think that's we can find this one in the public domain. There are around 40 countries published different projects. We have identified 15 investor opportunity areas targeting the investors, giving very much detail regarding all the details, basically giving a kind of information required for an investor to come and then look into the investment in that area. So that is again a kind of again we follow a methodical approach for selecting these IOAs. Personally, we have 15 IOAs, and it's a dynamic tool where depending upon the priority, we can always update it. So those are kind of tools through which now we are promoting our urban resilience projects. I just want to go into the operational level. I just want to bring one of the case example, which is in fact done by UN Habitat with the funding of the Australian government. I would say it's a kind of a success story where we have bring down the national level into the city level, as Dr. Basnaik indicated, which basically covers the guiding principles and the methodology presented by Dr. Basnaik. So basically we start with, as he said, the risk mapping, basically understand the risk, vulnerability. Then we go into the planning. The plan is the city level. We develop the resilience plan, then integrate into the city planning. So we basically not a separate plan, but part of the city plan. Then we try to, in fact, instrumentalize this concept into the local governance there, institutions. And finally, also we have a strong capacity building program for both community as well as local authorities. Some of the outputs basically there, we have established a kind of a community-based, disaster management unit. And also we have a kind of a community, the partnership with the local authorities, which was lacking earlier. Then also we have disaster management pilot projects. These are targeting the future expansion, but it started some pilot projects to test some of the concepts, as I think it's also highlighted by Dr. Basnaik. So based on these pilot projects, we have a comprehensive awareness program, capacity building, and also come up with some case studies, success stories, which are captured for future use. So these sites are now open for even funding. Maybe AIIB can consider for that one. There are projects identified for further expansion. So that's the way we followed basically. I think it's very much aligned with what Dr. Basnaik indicated. So this basically from my side. Thank you very much for giving us to share our approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tutsita, for packing so much information in a short 5 minutes. So you've talked all the way from the strategic level framework assessment to the operational level to how you find, through the government's central bank and financing system, make sure that financing goes to the right project, and then to how to mobilize communities even. So thank you very much for laying that out clearly for us. And lastly, we have Professor Tony Wong from Monash University of Australia. He is Professor of Sustainable Development at the university and is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. And he was the 2018 laureate, Global Water Laureate, awarded by the International Water Association. So he is trained as an architect and designer, but his name is also always associated with water. I'm personally a fan of the water-sensitive cities of his body of his work. I think that started as academic and design work, but eventually became an Australian government initiative that actually invests in Australian cities and global cities in terms of helping the cities to become more sensitive to water, to promote integrated water use. So Professor Wang, stage is yours. And I know you don't have slides. Okay, here's.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon. I don't have any slides. I really wanted to take the time to reflect on the conversation that we have thus far and make some, I think, really important point. We've heard from the 3 speakers today about this whole concept of looking at risk reduction, risk management, all within the guise of resilience. And each of the 3 speakers, in fact, make the point that the concept of risk reduction or resilience, that is a social, technical endeavor. Really important for us to acknowledge that. I mean, we heard from the presentation, if you look at the 6 bubbles around resilience, and I did a quick count, there are 3 of them that are actually related to social and institutional matter. There's one related to early warning that spans across social and technical. A really important sort of final comment about the notion that you can have the best technology for early warning, but if communities do not know how to respond to those early warning, even if you got your communication right, then resilience is not there. And then of course there are the structural elements. I guess, and I'm being presumptuous here, but I guess they are the infrastructure elements that everybody really wants to invest in. And I want to leave you with this, is that even to colleagues in AIIB, that protecting your investment require investments in the social and institutional capacity development. And that whilst you may find that it is not within the remit of a bank to actually start to think about capacity building, at the very least, you really need to consider the partnership that you have within country to ensure that in country, as a co-investment, actually invest in building those capacity. And it's not just about community capacity, it is also about institutional capacity to look at multifunctional infrastructure, to look at co-investing and co-operating and maintenance of those infrastructure. Because in some sense, I hope that you can see that in protecting your asset, you actually need to invest in some of the social institutional development that goes with the changing of an era that we are moving to. Another reflection I have really is about why cities. And I think it's fair, and we all acknowledge this, that the cities are the melting pot of all the issues. It's a convergence of multiple climate impacts. It's not just about water, even though water management can permeate through a number of your climate actions. Cities is just a melting pot of that. And cities is also the melting pot of the impact both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of community. Yeah? Cities are also important because they actually hold the majority of most countries' GDP. And so that investment becomes really important. So three things. Cities magnify the impact that you observe because of the density of the space and the amount of investments that are concentrated in cities. So in that regard, I'd like to now touch on a topic that I'm very familiar with, and that is that there is also a significant push in many cities to actually bring nature back into city. And I'm delighted that the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank launched a report just only a couple of days ago that actually recognizes nature as infrastructure. That is huge if you actually think about how the institutional perspective of nature is now turned around its head. We all know from institutions that infrastructure requires ongoing investments in operation and maintenance. I've been working for many years looking at nature and actually find that the biggest Achilles heel in nature is the lack of maintenance. And that we can build fantastic natural systems, but there isn't really the investment base or the rate base that actually supports their operation and maintenance. Now, in a city space, our conception of nature is also different. And this leads me to the notion of what is perhaps another tool that we need to develop, and some of us have developed aspects of this, is how do you document the type of ecosystem-based services that nature delivers? And there are many in the urban space. Water cleansing, climate mitigation, flood management, just to name a few. With water cleansing, you now find that nature systems are also means of harvesting local water that actually increases your water security. And then there is nature in urban systems that promote biodiversity and increase that biodiversity that have a direct impact on your resilience, in your health resilience, in terms of communicable diseases and so on. All of these ecosystems are not well economically documented. And so you find that our traditional way of project assessment actually tends to inherently bias single dimension infrastructure rather than multi-objective infrastructure, because we can't capture a lot of the economic value that is sometimes is tangible and sometimes they are intangible. Right? A piece of work that's been done in Australia is actually to try and overcome that in being able to undertake economic valuation of nature-based solutions at a city scale, not at a large regional country scale, but at a city scale. By documenting the economic value, we also get to document the beneficiaries, who actually benefits from those ecosystem services. And by having that, we are now able to establish a platform for blended financing. The co-financing can be attributed to the beneficiaries. How much is private sector beneficiaries? How much is government or community-wide beneficiaries? Because their return on investments are also quite different. Yeah. So I would like to add to this two things. A tool that is able to capture the level of social resilience in a community. And that, by capturing that, we also get to understand what additional social investment needs to go hand in hand with infrastructure investment. And secondly, with nature-based solution, a tool that is able to capture and value the range of ecosystem services that nature in urban environment delivers, the nature-based solutions. And that tool can then become the basis for blended financing, and that it is not necessary and it doesn't have to be that financing all needs to come from government. It actually can be the basis of private-public partnerships in a lot of infrastructure investment. So I like to commend the discussion before me in the sense that understanding risks is very important, and it may appear to be very deterministic, but the reality is that climate drivers in itself cannot be deterministic. So the risk assessment that pivots into scenario development and scenario planning becomes really important. Another set of tools, of course, about the technical tool is, of course, the non-technical tools of measuring, tools that enable us to understand and measure social resilience, and tools that are able to measure economic valuation of nature-based solutions are the two that I like to throw into the mix with these discussions to provide that suite that allows investment to be targeted, but also to be balanced, yeah? And that it is not just about physical infrastructure that we need to invest in. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Wang. That was enlightening 5 minutes. And now I personally have many questions following your discussion, and us to as well to other discussion. But let me welcome all of you to please take your seats on the stage so we can be facing the audience members and the viewers online and take more questions from the audience and further our discussion. If I may ask you to please sit in sequence according to the PowerPoint slide so people can identify you quickly. Thank you. Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Let's first ask the audience. No, not working. Oh, don't touch it. Got it. Okay. Thanks so much. So let's first take a round of questions from the audience members. Okay. I already see hands. Julia, please, and please identify yourself for the panel.
Thank you, Yuan, and thank you, the panelists, to your interesting observations and conversations. I have two questions, perhaps maybe to all of the panelists, because I would very much like to know. One is, to what extent the national adaptation plans can really support the work and effort that is needed in terms of, the city-scale urban planning and the related assessments that have to be done. has there been some analysis that you are aware of that looks at this specific topic? Because we all know that, for example, NDCs that are speaking to the mitigation efforts usually are not detailed enough, and they're very high level. They provide you some basic information on where the country wants to go in terms of their emission reduction targets. And then, so the alternative document on adaptation and resilience is then the national adaptation plans. And I'm also just curious from your experience and views, how detailed are those, and can they really help in building that urban resilience at the city and municipal level? So that's question number one. Apologies. And question
And
number two.
who are you directing that question to?
Everyone.
Okay.
That would be to everyone. I think you have different perspectives, so I would be just keen to know. And then my second question is to Professor Wong on the nature-based solutions. I couldn't agree with you more on how they are very important to support the building of the resilience in the urban sector. However, the practitioners are often prioritizing the grey infrastructure versus the nature-based solutions and the benefits that they can provide. And I think you rightly pointed to the fact that when you look at the valuation of the benefits that the ecosystem services can provide, then you might prioritize that. But I was wondering whether, again, at the very municipal level, at the master plans and the different policy interventions that the municipalities prepare, how can they include the nature-based solutions in their urban planning processes? Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And let's collect a couple more questions so our panelists also have the time to think about the answers. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Yuan, and to the panelists for very insightful presentation so far. So my simple question to Professor Wang is, we all know very well, and it's also very well documented, the benefits of nature-based solutions, triple dividends and so on, but it's just not happening at the scale anyway. So we are already having the difficulty of measuring the economic or financial benefits of MBS, and then you also highlighted the social resilience benefits. So it's very, very challenging actually to tackle these things, and I just wonder whether you can share some insights on how we can start to tackle these things and really make the case, and we can scale up, and particularly institutions like AIB, what can we actually do to help move things along? Thank you.
Thank you. No? Okay. Okay, let's start with three questions actually from the two audience members. Professor Wang, do you want to speak first on the two questions directed to you? Okay, yeah. So if any other panelists wanted to respond to the first question, the microphone is right here.
So I can start with the national adaptation plans. So we are planning to undertake a similar review of what we did in the NDC for the Urban Continent National Adaptation Plan, together with OECD and the Global Green Growth Institute, and partnership also with UNHABITAT and UNDP. This will follow a similar taxonomy that we use for the NDCs. So far, we did a preliminary analysis, and getting to your point, NAPs are more scattered in quality, depth, and structure compared to NDCs, and that reflects also on the urban content. And still, the harmonization, for example, on risk analysis, including hazard, vulnerability, and exposure, is also very diversified. I wouldn't have too high expectation about complete set of baseline present all across the NAPs, and that's exactly why we need to undertake a similar analysis in order to give countries direct recommendation for more strong development of these fundamental policy documents and their implementation, particularly at local level. Very quickly on the nature-based solutions, a couple of years ago we realized with WHO and ADP and a study regarding climate health interlinkages in cities, and we found very limited evidence regarding the co-benefit of local climate action also related to nature-based solution on health. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The contrary, we know it exists, but the problem is, as Professor Wong mentioned, finance, it's also to quantify it. And that could be an important element to be able to quantify cost of inaction and really return of investment in that sense. Over.
Yeah, just to add to that, our experience of this NAP at national level and for the local level, there's a gap, as you said, and one of the challenges we have in NAP also, some are very qualitative. Like we don't have tools to quantify the impact, especially, for example, like nature-based solution, whatever. As he said, we don't have quantification of the economic benefit and so on. So that is a challenge, even for divert the financing. So therefore, having identified these gaps, presently we are localizing the national adaptation plan. So we have 3 levels of governance. We have national government, we have provincial government, and local authorities. Presently, we are preparing the national adaptation plan for all the provinces. It's happening now, which is a way to go into the even local level, but presently it's happening at provincial level. So there we see that more and more localized aspects are coming in. So that's, I think that's one of the positive things. At the same time, when you look at this central bank green finance taxonomy, when it's first supported by IFC, so they guided us to do that because they have also engaged with taxonomies in China and also EU. So what they have come up with is mainly the mitigation one because they have some data. We have tools, we have matrices, so they come up with mainly the mitigation. But when it's present to the local the systems, they say that no, we need more adaptation because we are having more impacts of the climate change rather than contributing to the climate change. So therefore, then they have included more adaptation areas into the taxonomy, but still we have gaps that because some of these the matrices or threshold values are not there yet for us to quantify. So there we have that gap, but still as a priority, the government has pushed the central bank to include adaptation there. So there's a gap there basically. In financing, of course, we have funding for the local government separate budgets basically. So they can prioritize. So there are some of these the pilot projects I indicated that the 4 cities, they have come up with this national adaptation plan for the city level as a piloting. So it's not for the whole country, but at least we have some success best practices to take into account for the future direction. So basically what I see, there's a gaps in national adaptation plan, having less information without having good methodical approaches. We have a gaps in implementing some of the national adaptation plan. That's a gap. But then I think it's a very important area for us. So therefore we prioritize it, but there's an issue of lack of data, the tools in that context. Then just respond to this nature-based solution also. In our national environment action plan, we identify as very important area for intervention, nature-based solution, with specific solution being now documented and then present to the city and other levels to implement. So we are just capturing these nature-based solutions which are there historically and to adapt to the future actions. So that's an important area also we are trying to do that. But again, we have that gaps in the data and information on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Senaka.
Yeah, maybe on NAP, NAP
I have to
process.
ask you to please raise your voice even further.
Maybe
Thank you.
regarding NAP, I think we got a sort of very national perspective from Tusitha, because from Sri Lanka, what he was, I think you have been involved in that process. From our end, actually, we also heard from Nicola about the global perspective. So from our end, as a regional organization, what we have been doing actually, what we have been trying to do to connect with the UN for NAPs process, UN for NAP process. So we discussed a couple of times, and now we are registered as sort of like, technical support partner. So the countries, they are asking some support from the UN for NAP process, and they used to direct to us. So whether we can provide technical support to that. So that's one thing. Specifically connecting to your concern, comment. I think as he was also mentioning, it is very important for us to get this, an app to local level. So when it comes to local level, it automatically covers the city area as well. That process, I think, need to take place very soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Over to Professor Wang.
Thank you. I could say anything, and it wouldn't matter because you can't hear me anyway.
It's being recorded, so it will matter.
Okay. The first point I'd like to make is that, adaptation is very context specific. And so my immediate sort of notion is that a national adaptation plan actually is an oxymoron, right? And the only way that you can actually use a national adaptation plan to drive action is if the national adaptation plans are outcome specific, not prescriptive. And you let individual cities or regions then actually look at how they would deliver on those outcomes, or even output driven, right? But actually give them the flexibility to develop solutions that will get those outputs. So if you look at how does NAP drive city, it has got to be that. Cities in itself is quite unique in their character, and the contexts are different all the time, both in terms of setting, in terms of demographics, and in terms of their broad vulnerability. So that's my take on it, is that our job is actually to advocate to ensure that the NAP are not prescriptive, clearly articulating the outputs, and then individual cities can actually look at how their work can align to those outputs. In relation to nature-based solutions, I really want to make the point that nature-based solution is not the holy grail, it's not the silver bullet. In fact, the way forward is hybrid infrastructure. How nature-based solution blends with conventional gray infrastructure. Nature-based solutions are most effective in your everyday situation. I'm sure most of you would remember that when Beijing got flooded early this year, there was this huge article questioning about whether Sponge City was actually going to be there. When I was asked by journalists about that, I make the point that the expectation for one reason or another that the community have that Sponge City was going to solve everything have led to that. So when we talk about city shaping, it is really as much about how you embed nature-based solutions into your conventional systems, what I refer to as hybrid infrastructure. They are also hybrid because they are multifunctional. They are hybrid because they are potentially where co-investments come in. There's no one owner. And they are hybrid because they are multi-level government management and strategies in there. So they're multiple in many aspects to it. Now, there was a question about economic, that we know what the value of nature is. Why hasn't it been taken up? And that is because it is, again, context specific. Most of our economic valuation of nature is based on, conventional economic methods of willingness to pay. Willingness to pay is a reflection of the economic standing or economic situation of that city and the communities in that city. Yeah? So you'll find that by providing a broad representation of what nature really means, doesn't mean anything to the communities that you ultimately will need to consult with in delivering nature-based solutions. I'll give you an example. In Australia now, local government are the best place to deliver the integrated solution, because local government looks at infrastructure and people. Actually, as you move further and further up the level of government, you find that most governments are more interested in the broader, large-scale infrastructure, and they've lost that connection between people, and therefore the economic metrics of valuing nature-based solutions also becomes less and less people-centric. and more simply about what outcomes do we get from it from a functional perspective, but not from a cultural and a livability perspective. So we find, for instance, that by being able to understand the demographic situation, be able to consult with community, that there are elements of nature-based solutions that will get embedded into city planning and master planning in that sense. And of course, a more developed first world country will have quite a different perspective on their value on nature. And that for developing countries, it is still the function of disaster prevention, health improvement that actually can be quantified compared to the more intangible of quality of life, cultural values of water. That tends to not come up to that point. So you find that there will be different levels of nature-based solutions being implemented. And that's okay, because everything is evolving. As society grows, you find that their perception of the quality of their life and the livability of the environment will change as well. So my sense is that, again, I refer back to the AIIB report on nature as infrastructure. It's a very good scene setting, but at the moment, it doesn't get to a level of detail that actually allows us to do anything at the city level. At the city level, you actually need to look at that sort of blending of tangible services and cultural and quality of life type services. And they are very difficult to capture, but there are strong economic methods to allow you to capture that. So I say don't lose heart. And my final example to this is that, and I use Singapore as an example. Some of you may be familiar with Singapore and the Bishan Park project, the conversion of, I think, 1.3 kilometers of concrete drain into a park. $90 million it was, right? And there are times whereby government just have to make a decision, this is important. Because when that was built, no economic model in the world can justify that project. But now, when you actually do the social survey on how the community sees the value of it and their willingness to pay for something, it has actually changed the whole dimension of it. So there are times whereby government needs to be visionary, but there are now data slowly coming in whereby those willingness to pay for non-tangible benefits are coming in to justify the next project that is similar to Bishan Park in that sense.
Thank you, Professor Wang. I wish we had more time, but we already have 10 minutes of overrun. But I appreciate so much all of your interventions, and let me try to summarize in 1 minute. I think all four speakers spoke strongly on cities taking the lead. We all talk about how under the National Adaptation Plan, it is really to the cities to take the lead, and I appreciate especially Professor Tolin, your analysis of how much content we actually have in NDC, right? And there is such a missing information of how much urban climate finance is available. Even among our MDB colleagues, we don't have of our own lending portfolio the specific number. So there's definitely a huge information gap to be filled about what cities have done and what the world has done to cities. And second, the key message really is about tools and technologies that started with Dr. Sineka's presentation on how do you analyze urban level, city level risks, not just regular typical disasters risks, but climate inclusive risks. And that same argument for how we need to improve our modeling and methodology applies to Professor Tony Wang's intervention on the NBS, right? We all generally agree that's a great thing, but we cannot quantify, we cannot have enough evidence from all dimensions yet to convince government officials and decision makers that this is the right thing to do. But I also like your intervention very much about let's not think NBS as a silver bullet, right? We need to mainstream it into things that we already are doing. We need to leverage the multifunctionality of the NBS investment to be effective. And that brings me to Dr. Tusita's intervention, he has made many points, but the one thing that I really value is how you actually, all the national level, city level actions, investment policies eventually drill down to how they affect communities, how they bring communities along in this very challenging journey towards achieving urban resilience. So with that, I thank our distinguished panel very much, and thank you all the audience in the room and our viewers online. I especially want to give a shout out to my partnership colleagues, Ping Yan Chia and Annie Hu. You initiated and organized this session, so thank you so much. This is the result of your hard work. So thank you, everyone. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. Okay, thank you.